Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Ethical Consumer Podcast. My name is Julia, and I am your host for this episode. Today, joining me is Chuck Tryon with Bushel Boy Farms, based out of Minneapolis, originally Owatonna, I believe. And they actually have somewhere close to me in Mason City. So welcome, Chuck.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm happy to have you. So we've had farmer guests before. We've had public health guests before. So we're not just dealing with consumer packaged good food and consumer packaged food beverage, but you are our first sort of produce representative company, if you will. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Great.
It'll be fun. Now, the first question that I ask pretty much everybody, what is your favorite food or beverage? And you don't have to say tomatoes, but you can.
I won't say tomatoes, but I'll tie it in with something that I'm very fond of. So, from a very early age to this very day, my favorite food has always been tacos.
Yes.
Tacos of all forms, seafood tacos, meat tacos, tofu tacos. I just love the versatility of it, the both simplicity but also complexity, if you want, and with regardless of type, a really good fresh homemade pico de gallo, which is where the tomatoes come in, it is just puts it over the top for me.
I love it. And yes, that is hands down one of my favorites as well, because you can do so many things with it, so many ingredients. You can spice it up, you can spice it down. You can make it bland if you want to, I guess, but that's no fun. So everyone loves tacos.
Yeah, it's the perfect sort of play with your food meal.
Yes, definitely. And it includes tomatoes. So
It does.
Bushel Boy Farms is now there's a series of greenhouses both in Minneapolis and in Mason City. And you grow tomatoes and recently strawberries.
Correct. Yeah. So our original site is in Owatonna, Minnesota, which is about 75 miles south of the Twin Cities. We're now up to a total of 9 greenhouses. 8 of those are sort of interconnected. So it's like you built a small house at one point, and then you kept adding on to that house, and that's what's happened in Owatonna. So we have about 33 acres of greenhouse space in Minnesota. And one of those, the newest parts of that is a research and development greenhouse, that we put in about 2 years ago. And during that time, we are now wrapping up our second crop of strawberries. So we've been trialing strawberries. The trial has gone amazingly well, both learning how to grow them, but also the response from shoppers. Primarily right now in stores in the Twin Cities, where we have some of the local chains where the shoppers have figured out what days of the week we deliver, and they arrive at opening time in the morning so that they can make sure they get strawberries before they're gone.
I love it. You have a following. You have people busting down the doors of the grocery store to get in there.
Yeah. So I'm right now actually in our Mason City, Iowa facility. It's a brand new facility. We are actively packing fresh tomatoes as we speak, which is where the background horns honking may come into play. But those tomatoes are being packed fresh. They're being picked up within 24 hours and delivered to some of your favorite stores throughout the state of Iowa.
Yes. Awesome. And on your website actually as well, you have listed some of the stores. Now, certain chains are also, you're mostly in Iowa and Minnesota right now. So if you see Whole Foods and you're listening in California, you're not going to find Bushel Boy there.
Exactly. Yeah. You'll primarily find us in the states of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, North and South Dakota, and then we stretch as far east as Chicago right now.
And that we'll return to a little later in the episode too, because I especially want to talk about that. That is one of the biggest things. How far does your food travel to get to you? And here in the Midwest, we are obviously landlocked. Certain types of food they don't make it here because we can't grow it here, and we have horrendous winters. So I'm especially excited to talk about that later.
Good.
But you've been kind of in the food and beverage industry for a while. You are now the president of Bushel Boy Farms, and that is a somewhat recent occurrence. Was that last year or the year before?
Yeah, just last year. So I joined in the fall of 2020,
Okay.
and I'm just thrilled to be at a company that has both the history but also opportunity ahead of it.
Sure, I love that. Now, before you worked with some pretty big name brands. How is working for Bushel Boy, a smaller local build operation, like you said, with history, compared to maybe the giants in a nice way?
Yeah, so a couple things, and yeah, I've had the pleasure of growing up professionally in some great organizations. So I originally started working for the Pillsbury Company, which ultimately became part of General Mills. And a great deal of that time I spent working on the Green Giant vegetable brand. And that's where kind of my entry into the world of specialty vegetables started, and really gave me appreciation of all forms of vegetables, fresh, frozen, and shelf stable. And it's really that grounding of really good agricultural practices, really good business, processes and practices. It really gave me the grounding to then look and see what other things I wanted to do, professionally. So I did go to work for a smaller food company, after that, and to get an idea of life in the world of small business, where the resources are different, the challenges are different, you worry about different things, and not everybody can make that leap from the safe confines of a large world-class organization to the more entrepreneurial, scrappy, opportunistic company that can still make a huge impact in the areas that it chooses to play in. And that's what brought me to Bushel Boy, was that good grounding professionally, and then that ability to take what you learn in a large organization and apply the right parts of that to a smaller organization without losing the spirit of that smaller organization.
There you go. Definitely. I help run a yoga studio, and we are scrappy, and I understand that feeling. It's like, oh man, this would be wonderful if we had all of this backing and all of this, stability, especially in the past year or so. But then kind of the scrappiness and the familial and community aspect, like you said, keeping the spirit. The spirit is what I think is so special about so many smaller operations. You have your trade-off, but it's got a whole lot of heart.
Yep, exactly.
Wonderful. Now, did you grow up in the Midwest, or are you a transplant?
Yes and yes. Originally from Indiana. So I started there. My grandparents and great grandparents had a farm in southern Indiana. My father was in the grocery industry, and so I consider myself a grocery brat. We moved around a lot as my father's job took him to different markets in the country. So I ended up on the East Coast until it was about time to finish high school. And as I was finishing high school, my family moved to Minnesota. So I've been here a long time since. So, born in the Midwest, and I'll finish in the Midwest, and had some experiences beyond that as well.
Sure, that's wonderful. Did you go to school in the Midwest? Did you go for business, or you said you were a grocery brat?
So a couple. Yeah. So I went. I got my undergrad at the University of Minnesota in international relations, and really focusing on international commerce. And at that point, looking at the international trade of food. And then went on and got my MBA also from the University of Minnesota in marketing, which is what kind of led me into the food industry on the brand management side.
Okay, I gotcha. Well, cool. Fun fact, I actually did international relations as well, and I teach yoga and host a podcast. So, but it was the most invaluable experience and information to see how the world works, and then especially when we're talking about food, how all of that trade works or doesn't work sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, to your point on we're in the Midwest, and sometimes it's sometimes harder to put the rest of the world into perspective and understand what else is out there, what the challenges are, what people's lives are like in different countries around the world.
Definitely. Most definitely. Now, since this was a Midwest established business and still is, so based in Owatonna, Minnesota, you've already mentioned that this has quite a history to it. Could you give me just a little rundown of the history of Bushel Boy? How did it start? You did not found it, as you joined the team last year.
Yep.
So
Yep.
who did?
Yeah, so a gentleman by the name of Jay Johnston founded it in Owatonna, Minnesota. He just enjoyed growing tomatoes, and so what started as like many of us do, a backyard garden, and knowing that he, like a lot of others, looked forward to summer, and particularly in this geography, looked forward to garden fresh tomatoes in the summer in the upper Midwest, where you've lived through a long, harsh winter, and you know that the next harsh winter is not far behind. So there's that fleeting moment of gosh, I've waited 9 months for this. I can't wait to bite into this tomato. So that as he realized that was he wasn't the only one that felt that way. He also realized there's a business opportunity if he could find a way to bring that vine ripened fresh tomato into people's homes more than just 3 months of the year. This would be a pretty amazing place, and so he started a small greenhouse, and like a lot of entrepreneurs, really started small, learned how to grow it, learned how to build customer relationships and deliver products right to stores. And as that business grew, the greenhouses grew, and so the company continued to add on additional acres of space, add on more technology. So what started as a pretty low tech, enclosed glass greenhouse with not a lot of extra lighting, really just providing heat during the summertime, has grew into a very high tech operation with high tech lighting, high tech climate control, high tech ways of bringing the right nutrition and water directly to the plants. And so that's really been the expansion and growth of the company. But it's sort of been one greenhouse at a time, and just a smart way. Again, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, you get some success, and you use that success to fund your next expansion, and you do it smartly and Midwest conservatively, so that you don't grow faster than you're able to support. And then you look back and realize you've built a really nice business, and that's what the founder did, and we're my charge is to take that great business and that great brand, and continue to build on that and make it even greater.
Excellent. Now, is Jay Johnson still involved?
He is not. He sold the company a number of years ago, and then did go on to help start another greenhouse operation in the leafy greens space. So he now is with a company called Revel, REVOL, Revel Greens. They are our neighbor. They're about 5 miles north of our original facility in Owatonna. So he stayed in this sustainable, controlled environment agriculture space, and moved on to a different type of product.
Sure. So you're growing tomatoes in Owatonna and tomatoes and strawberries in Mason City. Mason City is the experimental one?
No, the other way around. So in Owatonna, we've got tomatoes primarily, but then we put in a research and development greenhouse on that site as well. So that's where we're trying strawberries. And then in Mason City, for the time being, we're just doing tomatoes during this first crop. And part of that is, that's our core business, but B, we want to make sure we grow something that we know how to grow in a brand new warehouse or a brand new greenhouse. And that's, again, trying to make sure that everything works properly, and we don't enter, too many variables into this system until we know all the kinks have been worked out from a brand new facility.
Sure. So I don't get the strawberries yet in Iowa, but hopefully eventually I will get the strawberries.
We've had a lot of requests, so I'm going to add your name to that request list, and yes.
Excellent. I would like them at the Hy-Vee in Cedar Falls on University Avenue, please. That would make me so happy.
Yes. I believe Hy-Vee would like that as well.
Yes. Oh, too good. So, when we're talking about getting food locally, and like you said, being able to get it all year round, we don't always think about this because, we have farms here in the Midwest. This is what we do. We grow food. But tomatoes do not last like garlic and potatoes do. So, where would we be getting our tomatoes from in the winter? Is there a country or a different state that is like, this is the tomato area and then everything is shipped, or is it kind of hodgepodged?
The vast majority are coming from greenhouses in Canada.
Okay.
And also some greenhouses in Mexico, and then some open fields production as well. But tomatoes happen to be one of those crops that have transitioned to where greenhouses right now are the primary source of tomatoes. However, the majority of them coming into the U.S. right now are coming from Canada and Mexico.
Okay. Got you. And then, we can picture that geographically. How long would it take to get to Iowa or Minnesota in that case?
Yeah, so they're in general, you can assume that they're spending. Well, first of all, they spend about half of their shelf life on a truck. Is the way that to think about most produce that's entering the country. So they're going to be in transit for 3 to 5 days, depending on where they're getting to. So it is considerable time that's in transit. And because of that, and again, this was really the value proposition for Bushel Boy when they started was we want our tomatoes to ripen on the vine, not in a truck. And that's, that is our point of difference. It's why tomatoes that you get out of your garden taste so much better than what you're used to at the store. Because you're picking them when they're ripe. You're letting that tomato itself ripen, the way it was intended to, which is on the vine, versus in transit where the color is changing and getting more red, but the flavor isn't really changing.
So visually it continues to mature, but the flavor is just kind of the unripened, almost bittery.
Yeah, and sort of just missing. It's missing some of that real pure tomato flavor, and that's really that's really the sacrifice that you make when you're shipping product that is highly perishable. You're needing to plan for that shelf life, which means you're just picking it really before it was ready to be picked.
Sure. I remember the first time, and this was at actually a Hy-Vee location that is no longer there at our old house. And I remember seeing, and maybe it was Bushel Boy. I wish I remembered what it was. It had a yellow label even, so it very well might have been. But I remember seeing you could buy clusters of tomatoes. There'd be like 3 tomatoes still attached to the vine. And like bananas, you could always pluck it off. But I just picked up the whole vine, and I loved it because it looked like my tomato came from a plant instead of just this beautiful red shiny orb that I picked up at the grocery store on the shelf.
Yep, and I can with high confidence say that was a Bushel Boy tomato.
I'm pretty sure it was.
That you would have bought. Our little labels have changed, but they had been yellow up until about a year ago. And our main product that we now grow is exactly what you just described, which we call a vine-on tomato. And it's we deliver them to stores. Generally there's 3 to 5 tomatoes on that cluster, and it just again also helps sort of keep that shelf life, but also it makes it feel like somebody which somebody did. Somebody picked that carefully in the greenhouse. Somebody got it into that box. That eventually made its way to, in that case, to that Hy-Vee store.
Mm-hmm. It was so much more. I felt so much more connected to knowing that I was eating something that was grown in the ground. Like there's just this huge disconnect, and this has come up on the podcast before, but you buy it at the grocery store and you kind of forget what its life was before it was placed there with a price sticker on it. And it was just a nice reminder, almost farmer's market style, but at your conventional grocery store.
Exactly. And even better when it's January. And so.
Yes. And I can't get it at my farmer's market. Yes, definitely. So with the sustainability aspect of Bushel Boy, because you guys do some really cool stuff, and I'm assuming this comes from the humble beginnings of a backyard greenhouse there are a few things besides just the local transportation that make you guys really stand out. Could you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, and I'll use our brand new facility in Mason City as a great example, and I know you're in Iowa right now, as am I, and there's storms passing over us as we record this, and so at our facility, which we have about 17 acres of greenhouse here, all of that rain that's falling right now is captured, so there's no runoff. It's all being captured, goes into a rainwater retention pond that's on site, and that water is the water that we use to irrigate the plants. So that's the first step is we're capturing that rainwater, so it's not going off as runoff. So we keep it in the system. And then secondly, as it goes through our greenhouse and goes into our irrigation system, the water that doesn't get absorbed by the plants is being recaptured. And that water that's being recaptured is then goes through a UV light disinfection process so that we can reuse that water. So we're capturing the water and then we're reusing it as well. So that's our sort of pride and joy of a way that we're minimizing impact, but we're also doing what's right for the plants. The rainwater is much better for the plants, promotes a much healthier plant than water that we would need to bring in from the city water system that's been treated. So that's a big piece for us. The other parts are from a lighting standpoint. So we do use energy because we're a greenhouse, and in the wintertime have to supplement with additional lighting. But we're also starting to bring in LED lighting, which is a much less energy use into our greenhouses. So we're looking at lighting solutions with that. And then one of my favorite pieces is our plants are all as you walk through our greenhouse, and at some point I'd love to have you come see this for yourself. But you open up the door into the greenhouse, and flying around you are bumblebees. So we have bumblebees that live in the greenhouses. They do all the pollinating of the plants. So it's an amazing use of those pollinators. It's great for the plants as well, and because of that, and sort of what helps incent us is with those pollinators in the greenhouse, it makes us think really carefully about what type of pest control we might implement, and even though we're in a greenhouse, we do still fight pests that you would if you were in a field outside, and so there are different things that we have to control for, and we control for those, and if we were to use chemical pesticides, those pesticides would actually hurt our pollinators. So it's another good reason for us to eliminate the use of chemical pesticides in our operation, use beneficial insects as a method of controlling the health of the plants from a pest management standpoint.
Sure. That is such an interesting and relevant thing, especially because we had on a beekeeper earlier in this season. I want to say it was in the teens or in the 20s episodes, and now we're getting up there in the higher 30s. So it's been a minute. But she described the situation that bees and just apiaries in general are put through, in the sense that when bees are shipped, the bees travel, guys, and it's not just from flower to flower. It is across the U.S. There is this pollinator. It sounds like an awful thing when I say it like this, but this is what it's called: pollination for profit. But that is how bees are still around at this point. Their ecosystem is so trashed that if it weren't for beekeepers and pollinating for profit, they wouldn't be here anymore. But you move them around, and just like you said, depending on the pesticides, depending on the environment, if there's another hive that is sick, our poor pollinators are just getting thrown around, and yours get to live there, essentially. So that is their home.
It is. That's right. We've got hives that are in the greenhouses. Those hives get opened up in the morning, so the bees are out pollinating. And then they return to those same hives every night. So it's it's a really fascinating part of the things that you can do within agriculture indoors.
Sure. And it's not manipulating nature, it's helping it where it would otherwise not be able to exist, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, and in essence, you're replicating nature during its peak time, and you're allowing to have that natural environment occur 12 months out of the year instead of just 3 or 4.
What do you know? Now you are coming from the greenhouse standpoint, but what is the growing season for tomatoes? I unfortunately did not have success with my tomato plant last year, so I can't answer that question.
Yeah, it tends to, particularly in the upper Midwest, it's one of the last plants to be able to go in, and so it's really a mid to late summer start of harvesting, and goes until sort of the Labor Day period. So it's a relatively short crop cycle, and so again, from that standpoint, it's why the beauty of being able to have a greenhouse that allows you to have that fresh product 12 months out of the year. It is for us, that's what we strive for, is to do that with tomatoes, but also to do it with other fruits, with other vegetables that would make sense for someone to have a year-round fresh local offering.
Sure. Now, if folks didn't live in the Midwest, is there an area? Now you said, there we go, I'll backtrack. So tomatoes are mostly grown in greenhouses at this point, is what you'd said.
Yeah, the tomatoes for the fresh produce industry. Florida does do some as well. There's tomatoes, a lot of tomatoes grown in California, but much of that crop is going to more to the processing side.
Sure. So you can mimic the growing season in a repetitive fashion. So are you always getting tomatoes off the vine, or do you have like a harvest season as well?
Right now we're getting them off the vine almost the entire year. We do have to, the plants, the plants don't go forever. So we'll generally stagger when we put new plants in. But right now we can produce from one tomato plant could last 35 weeks, maybe even up to 40 weeks. So you get a 9-month season out of it, maybe even 10. And then that plant has sort of exhausted its ability to produce the quality that you need. So those plants then get removed, and then new plants are put in. So we're continually running a plant for the extent that it's productive, and then we'll replace that plant, do a clean out of the greenhouse, and then replace it with new plants and start all over again.
Okay, got you. And this is have you gone on to crop 2 or year 2 with the strawberries yet as well, or?
Yeah, yep. So we're just finishing the second season or crop of strawberries. We'll be done with that in the next probably 2 or 3 weeks. So mid-June we'll be done, and then we'll plant again later in the summer to start another season.
Sure. Now I remember at our old house, I'm having some throwback moments here. My fiance really wanted to grow strawberries in the garden because he loves strawberries. And the first year he was so disappointed because he planted the strawberry plants and they didn't do anything. Like they vined and I think they flowered, but they really didn't produce anything. And he was so confused, and he started to ask, a few friends who'd done it successfully, and they said, well, you don't get any strawberries until year 2. So it's kind of an investment, and you have to be patient and hope that your strawberry plants work. Does it work that way in the greenhouse, or is there something different that occurs?
So the good news for us is we actually get the plants when they're ready to produce fruit. So there are other companies that do the propagating both for tomatoes and for strawberries. So when we start a new crop, we're not planting the seeds. We have other partners that do that. So we're bringing in the plant that's ready to start growing and producing fruit immediately.
Okay, so similar to someone who would start their planters and their herbs and things on a windowsill and then move them outside somewhere in Canada at a wonderful greenhouse. Yours are started, and then you get to plant them in
Exactly.
your greenhouse.
Exactly right.
Okay, well, cool. Now, do you usually get from the same greenhouses in Canada? Is there kind of a relationship established?
Yeah, there's generally companies that really focus just on sort of the propagation side of plants for greenhouses and for open field planting as well. But yeah, we tend to use a small set of suppliers that we built good relationships with. We need those plants to come in that are the exact plant and variety that we specified, but also have all the sort of health characteristics that we would want. So we want to make sure that they're in good quality plants when we bring them in, so that they perform well in the greenhouse.
Sure. I suppose if you brought in a diseased plant, from what I understand with plant things, if it's too close to the other plant, which in a greenhouse, I'm going to assume it is, your whole greenhouse could get wrecked pretty fast.
Yeah, it's we have to pay very close attention to any type of disease or pest that could come into play and take actions if need be. But again, we try to minimize that. Particularly because we're not using chemical pesticides, so we want to minimize any of the disease or pest pressure that could come in that environment.
Okay, got you. So you have to be ultra careful then, especially too, because you like the natural quality of the tomatoes without pulling all of the nasties on them.
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank you. Now, as far as sustainability goes, did Bushel Boy Farms have this established from the get-go back in 1990, or has this been something that whoever was in charge at the time saw a need for and implemented it later on?
Yeah, what I'd say is I don't believe from the outset they went in thinking about the sustainability benefits. It was really this was a food play. This was a way to get a really great product and have it available year round in a certain geography. Over time, what's really come into play as different, both from an industry standpoint, but also with our business specifically, is we realize the positive impact that we can have on looking for, how can we do a little bit better? And that's, really when I think about sustainability, I go back to lessons from mom, and my lesson from mom is always leave a place better than you found it. And that's so that's kind of the approach that the business has, is how do we lessen our impact? We already feel good that we do things sustainably, but sustainably isn't a fixed position. It's really about how can we do a little bit better. So how can we reduce our energy consumption? How can we find new ways to continue to reuse water? How do we get more out of the plants that we bring in, so that we have less waste when we're done and have plants that are going to compost. So we're always trying to do a little bit better. So I think that thinking has evolved and really just built on itself, from the beginning of the company. And it's what we're continuing to try to challenge ourselves on right now is how can we do a little bit better? How can we do better for our employees and make their lives better? When they leave here, how do we make our customers and our suppliers better? And so that's the approach we're trying to take and feel. We feel if we do those things, if we make the environment a little bit better, if we make our employees' lives a little bit better, our customers a little bit better, our business will be a little bit better because of that.
Sure. Oh, that's wonderful. Now you said compost. So when the plants are spent, for lack of better words, are you composting the tomato plants then too? What does that look like at the moment?
Yeah. So throughout the process and as these plants are growing, we're constantly doing work to the tomato plant. So we're removing leaves as they grow. So there's always plant waste, plant material that's coming out of the greenhouse that we are sending to compost. When we completely remove everything, we send as much as we can to compost. But one of the challenges we have is there are there's string that is used to secure the vines really to higher heights. There can be plastic clips that are used again to keep the plants in the right positions. So some of what we're currently doing, we're not able to send to compost because it has materials mixed into it that don't work in those systems. Which is why, to my point of getting better, we're evaluating how do we eliminate plastic in the greenhouse? How do we replace that with something that is compostable? Same thing with synthetic or nylon strings. How do we replace that with something that could be a hemp-based derivative for strings that we would use within there? So that's our again, back to our push to get better is finding things that we're not doing as well as we would like to, and finding a new solution. And that's it's the fun part of what we do. We're not in a fixed state. We're constantly trying to do a little bit better, and not just accept things because it's not working today.
Sure. That I have found, this has been a reoccurring theme as well as far as recycling and composting goes. There's a lot that's put on consumers and a lot that's put on businesses, but also the compost system in Iowa does not particularly exist. It's challenging. You either have to take it into your own hands or find a facility that will do it for you, but most municipalities do not have something like that. Does Mason City? Because I know Cedar Falls, Waterloo don't.
Yeah, so Mason City does, and we're working with them right now to have a good stream of plant material that works in their composting system. And so they were in fact one of the first visitors to the greenhouse when we opened up. Was we brought them in so they could see what type of plant material would be coming out. And how that could fit into their composting process and system. So that's what we're working with them on right now, and that is set up really to provide good compost for the residents of northern Iowa. So it's a really nice way for us to get involved early on, doing some things that are just much more circular in nature. So.
Go Mason City. That's awesome. We have, so Cedar Falls really just, and Waterloo, I believe too, that we have yard waste. Now, would a tomato plant that is spent count as yard waste? Because here, I don't think it does.
Yeah, I think I don't know is my
sure.
my answer. But it theoretically it should. But it really depends on the process that they might have, which is why all good reasons to for businesses to really partner early on with those organizations and entities, again, so that they can kind of learn collectively of what in our case it probably doesn't make sense if we have tomatoes that didn't meet a quality grade or had damage to them. Tomatoes aren't necessarily great for the compost system. But the plant material itself is, and so that's what we're making sure that what we're going to send to compost fits within that composting system, and not deliver stuff that's that's sort of going to upset the recipe that they're using.
And tomatoes being very acidic, I would assume that could be kind of easy to do.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, wow. That's such a cool thing. And really, Mason City is just about an hour away. I would say I wish we could have done this in person, but it is not a nice day outside today. So in the future, yes, I would love to come see the operation and show our listeners what's going on there too. It's such a cool thing to have close by. We have a lot of farms, but the greenhouses, do you know of many others in the Iowa and Minnesota? Well, I guess Owatonna has quite a bit of farms around it as well, but are there many?
There's a lot of farming in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa as well, as you know. There's not a lot of greenhouse operations really in the Midwest, and that's where again we're excited to be able to build another location, but still stay true to our core set of customers, and then grow from there. And the benefit for us of Mason City, Iowa, is we can now we can stretch down as far south as St. Louis, and get over to Omaha and Kansas City, and still with a product that can be considered local. So we can kind of look at Iowa grown as really having meaning to consumers and to retailers in those markets, those surrounding markets.
And there are so many grocery stores that cover this exact span that you're talking about too. I was up there in Minneapolis for a yoga training with my friend who grew up in Owatonna, actually. And one of the girls was so excited. She said, "Oh, you're from Iowa? We just got a Hy-Vee in Apple Valley. I'm so excited." I'm like, "You're really excited?" I mean, Hy-Vee's fine, but like she was so excited for Hy-Vee. And I'm like, I didn't think that was that big of a deal. But you have these proud Midwest chains and people love them. And they often start, in one state and then spread to just the 3 or 4 around them.
Yep, exactly. And that's why it's a good match for our business to work with those types of chains that really focus on a local geography. And it might be, it might encompass 3 or 4 or 5 states, but they still consider themselves local grocers, and that's a perfect match for a local produce company like ours.
Definitely. Cool. Well, I had been doing mostly grocery pickup through the pandemic, so I didn't have as much of a choice as to which produce I got to pick. Now, do you know off the top of your head if the Hy-Vee in Cedar Falls happens to carry Bushel Boy right now?
I'll go with 98% certainty. The answer is yes.
Yes.
So that Vine-On tomato that we talked about, that you remember buying, that should have a nice little Bushel Boy Iowa grown sticker on it.
I'm going to go check this afternoon because yes, now I need to go make sure. I'm like 99% positive as well at the previous Hy-Vee location. I know I knew your name from somewhere. I'm nearly positive that's what I was getting, and those were my favorite tomatoes. So
yeah, and the benefit now is as I said, those are coming right from our new Mason City facility. If they are not there, I would say smile at your produce manager and ask them nicely, because he or she can get them for you.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure there'd be a demand for that here, especially knowing they're grown in Mason City now as well. That'd be awesome to see. Awesome. I will check back, and listeners, I will report back, and I will probably post a picture of me taking a big bite out of a beautiful, juicy tomato on social media when I do. So, Chuck, as far as sustainability with you, how have you seen the industry kind of maybe chuckle a little bit at sustainability in favor of the larger business practices and then slowly jump on board? Because it's been a little bit of a pull, but the larger scaled up businesses, clearly that's going to take a while to catch on.
Yeah. So, and I spent a lot of time and energy around things related to sustainability, and in fact, at one point, had a position as a director of sustainability for a large packaged food company. What I would say is the food industry as a whole has always had an incentive to be more sustainable, but that incentive was really coming from how do we reduce our costs. And the way that a lot of companies were approaching that is to look at things like packaging, for instance. If they could reduce the amount of packaging, which is a major sustainability play, that reduction in packaging equated directly to a reduction in cost, which either allowed a manufacturer to increase their profits or maintain them in light of competition and needing to be competitive in the store from a pricing standpoint. So there's been that profit-driven incentive, financial-driven incentive to have a reduced impact, and so there's been that play, that incentive. The transition, I think, that I've witnessed is thinking a little bit more genuinely of how do we really make things better? How do we really reduce the impact, not just within our system, but within the environment itself, within our world? How do we work with suppliers to do the same thing? So there's been much more of a focus from that standpoint. The other thing that's been, I think, a little slower, but has certainly picked up momentum over the last year is things beyond just the environmental piece, more about thinking about people and groups of people in our country that might be underrepresented. And I think about this from a produce standpoint. Right now, the latest figures I've seen is that only about 1 in 10 people in the U.S. Are consuming the amount of fruits and vegetables that is recommended, and some of that is driven by just accessibility to local produce, to fresh produce, and to affordable produce. And so those are things that I look at and say, how can we help with that? How do we make sure that as we have product available, or even planned product that should be going into to reach groups that aren't getting access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So we've been working with Second Harvest Heartland out of Minnesota on ways that we can more proactively have a steady stream of in this case fresh tomatoes going through the network of food banks that reach the upper Midwest. So that's where, again, I think that from a sustainability piece, that thinking beyond just the environmental side of sustainability and getting more into people, and that can come in all different ways. It could come in things that relate to social justice, things that relate to to diversity in our workforce and equity within that. So all things that are heavy challenges that we all face, but there's things that we can do as a local Midwest producer of fresh produce. There's things that we can impact, and that's what we're looking for right now, is to stretch our thinking a little bit and find new ways that we can impact people in our communities.
That's amazing. That sustainability goes way beyond. I mean, it's such a hard word to define because it is our environment. It is what's going into our landfills. It is, are we going to run the soil out of nutrients? It is everyone actually taken care of and invited to the table and has food on their plate while they're at the table? Like, yeah. There are so many things to consider. I just got goosebumps actually, because that is such a beautiful thing to make sure that Bushel Boy Farms as a company is doing, and that you're considering that for your communities. In a previous episode, I've referenced this before. I had never thought about how all of the corns and soybeans grown in Iowa don't stay in Iowa. That's actually not what we're eating. That's going like the family farms are, but everything that you see between here and Mason City is actually probably going elsewhere, and a lot of stuff leaves and it doesn't always come back, or the not even profit, but the, if you will, an energy exchange, financial and otherwise, it's not coming back to the community. Right. So to know that you're not only is your produce staying local and that's your whole mission, but also, like you said, to your workers, to your employees, making sure that everyone is taken care of. That's sustainable. Yeah,
and we're at the moment looking at some ways that we can impact others who have had a tough year. The food service industry, restaurant workers. Those are things that we're in conversations with different groups on what can we do to help. How can we do some things that are are helpful, but also fun. And I mean, this, we all need a little bit more fun in our lives. So we're looking for that beauty that what we get is we produce really great, fresh, produce items, things that people love, things that put smiles on your face to either, to shop for, to cook, to eat. That's a happy thing. And so we don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's joy in what we do and what we provide. And we need to focus on that joy as we look to support our communities.
Sure. Do you have connections and organizations set up right now, or is that kind of a looking into the future? The past year was not really a great year for networking, so maybe not yet, but on the horizon?
Yeah, we've got some that are already in place, and others that we're really starting to make new connections. And again, it's fun. It's sort of, once you sort of open up this, the lid on this, some really interesting ideas start coming in. Really interesting, partnerships or alliances start to open up. So that's the fun part as it seems like there's some light ahead, that we're able to start that much more active planning for that right now.
Awesome. I'm excited to see where that goes. And I'm excited to just see the facility in Mason City too. That'll be cool to see how everything develops over the next few years.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'd love to have you come out.
Wonderful. I will take you up on that. Oh, now, do you have any advice for anyone, really, perhaps consumers who are looking to support local, or entrepreneurs or business persons that are looking to make a sustainable impact?
Yeah, so I'll start with consumers. I think it really starts with part of what we talked about, which is just being observant of where something's coming from. And it's, as you go in the store, and we'll stick with produce, you've got to look hard sometimes, but you'll start to get a sense for where something's coming from. It doesn't mean that it's bad, that it's coming from a different geography. It just means it would be good to know how far it might have traveled, and start comparing that with a product that might be local at some point, whether that's year round like our tomatoes, or whether it's that fresh local green bean in the summertime, and just start thinking about the taste differences and the quality differences and with that. So I think that it just really starts with just being a little bit more observant and thinking about the place it came from, not in a negative way, but the place it came from, the people that had an impact on that product growing and arriving at your store. I just think it does us all good to be a little bit more thoughtful about all the people that played a role in getting that food into your home. So I start there, and then as far as more entrepreneurs or people thinking about agriculture, produce, greenhouses, the way I've sort of phrased it is, there's a lot of energy, a lot of activity in the world of indoor agriculture. And I characterize that as it's not necessarily that it's the only future of farming, but it is a future of farming. And so I would encourage people to look into that. If you're interested in agriculture, if you're a student or have students, there is an emerging trend that's bringing agriculture and technology together, and so this is a fun time to be looking at this space. Iowa State University has within their horticulture department, does a lot of work related to greenhouse and indoor farming. So there's things to look at from that. Even if you're just interested, as an individual, their extension services can provide great information. And there's a lot of information about the greenhouse industry for people that just want to learn about it. So if you're an entrepreneur thinking about it, it won't take a very long Google search to find amazing resources, amazing educational resources at your fingertips. So you can get real smart real fast and look at this as a potential. The more, we want there to be lots of local products available in different markets around the country. So I'm thrilled that there's continues to be more greenhouses being built. It's it's important for the industry. It's important for consumers. And I think we'll continue to see the benefit of that, of regardless of whether you're in Las Vegas or Orlando, or Des Moines. You're going to start seeing more things available that were grown in a greenhouse, much closer to you than where it had previously been grown.
Sure. I'm thinking back to a previous episode and a future episode, past episode with Yellow Table Farm of Chipola, Iowa. Eric actually recorded the episode in his high tunnel. And then I recently went out to my friend's flower farm, Two Morrow's Acres, and he had just put up the high tunnel for their second high tunnel for the year, I believe, actually. A greenhouse is really just kind of the next step technology-wise, though a little bit more complicated to set up than the high tunnel, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, so there's the sort of the fancy industry term that you'll come across now is called controlled environment agriculture, and it really spans sort of the base level of kind of that of what you mentioned. So what sort of the high tunnel or hoop houses as they've been called. So much more low tech in terms of those types of operations, but that's a critical part for different products and also different geographies and depending on what the sort of the timing of when you want to be able to grow something. So it starts there, and then the next kind of phase is greenhouse growing. So that would basically be a structure that's that is a glass greenhouse, and that's what we operate. Those give you the ability to be fully climate controlled, operate year round, and utilize both natural light and then also supplement that with artificial light. And then where there's been more activity across the industry lately has been true indoor farming. So those are completely enclosed environments that are utilizing all artificial light. So that could be an old warehouse, but it's not a glass greenhouse. It's truly indoor farming that's solely reliant on artificial light. And there's a number of different companies that are trying different technologies in that space to grow. Primarily leafy greens is what's right now generally being grown in that type of technology.
It's not something I ever would have thought of, I guess. I mean, it's I suppose it's kind of the next step or the intermediary step between farming and greenhouse to have an entire farm indoors. I'm thinking of like Detroit and places like that where an entire industry has, or for whatever reason, it buckled essentially, and there's all of these vacant factories, and it's too expensive to tear down and rebuild, but maybe an opportunity.
Yeah, certainly a lot of investigation going on in that space. One of the challenges you have is we have the benefit of still relying on daylight and sort of to our earlier point, replicating the optimal conditions and allowing to have that happen all year long. Once you're indoors, things are a little bit differently. So you're not utilizing any natural daylight. So it's a little bit more futuristic, scientific. Doesn't feel as much like farming as it does something a little bit more laboratory like. That said, that's not to cast a negative stone at it. It has the ability to potentially get access to fresh local produce in areas where the access isn't there today. So you could have, this is where urban farming comes into play. So you could potentially get small scale urban farms that are indoor, completely indoor farms, producing products for communities that may not have access, ready access to, fresh, local, nutritious, and affordable fresh produce.
This is echoing the episode with Finnegan's Farms. They're outside of Detroit actually trying to combat the difficult access to culturally relevant and affordable and local food.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
It's a tricky equation. It's really,
Yeah.
and the code has not been cracked yet, but there are people working on it. And that's, again, that's fabulous that there are people working to crack that code, again, particularly on the affordability standpoint.
Yes, most definitely. Oh, wonderful. Chuck, this has been so great. This is a topic that we hadn't really covered yet on the podcast, not consumer packaged good, not farm, but greenhouse into your grocery store. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot from your website, actually, in fact, as well. Just, it's not something that I had considered because it's sometimes seems so far removed from the food that I'm eating. And I usually consider where my food comes from. But you see a tomato and you think, oh, this must have been grown outside at a farm. Nope.
Right.
Probably in a greenhouse, a happy greenhouse with happy bees and hopefully in Iowa or Minnesota.
Exactly.
Well, cool. Now tell our listeners where they can find more information and some of the stores we'd have around here where we can get Bushel Boy tomatoes.
Yeah, so they can find more information at our website, so bushelboy.com. Also, Bushel Boy Farms, you can check us out on Instagram and Facebook. We're in the majority of retailers in Minnesota and Iowa. The big ones that people would know about would be Hy-Vee, Cub Foods, Lunds and Byerly's, and Kowalski's, which is both incredible chains in Minnesota. We're in some Whole Foods stores. We're in Mariano's in Chicago. So you'll find us if you're in Minnesota and Iowa in particular, and western Wisconsin. You'll generally find us in your favorite grocery store.
Excellent. Mariano's has some good stuff too.
Yeah.
It's odd to say I have a favorite grocery store. Sorry, Hy-Vee. Sorry, Aldi. But Mariano's that's some impressive grocery shopping.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Chuck, thank you so much. I look forward to eventually being able to come and see the Mason City greenhouse and sinking my teeth into some tomatoes and hopefully some strawberries eventually. Any last words of wisdom or advice for our listeners?
I would just say to you, thank you for the time for me, but also just for this, for the podcast that you do. It's a great focus, and the variety of guests and the knowledge that you bring your listeners, I think is fabulous. So thank you for that. And the last kind of point that I'd give for people out there, have fun in the kitchen. Again, we need more joy. Food is joy. So buy fun things, try new recipes, get friends, families, kids, get them all involved. Have a taco,
Yes.
and put some pico de gallo on it that you made yourself. And then just enjoy life and enjoy the food that you have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Chuck. Awesome.
You got it.
Friends, this has been another episode of the Ethical Consumer Podcast with Bushel Boy Farms President Chuck Tryon. You can find them at bushelboy.com, and you can find us at the Ethical Consumer Podcast.